The observation deck of the Galactic Coalition training facility hummed with the usual afternoon energy. Recruits from 17 different species filled the tiered seating, their attention focused on the demonstration arena below. The space was designed for exactly this purpose, showing young soldiers the weapons and combat techniques they would need to survive in the dangerous territories beyond Coalition space. Instructor Vrel stood at the podium, her four arms gesturing as she spoke. She was a Korthan, a species known for their methodical approach to warfare and their extensive military history. Her chitinous exterior gleamed under the artificial lights, and her compound eyes swept across the assembled students with practiced efficiency. "Combat readiness," she announced. Her translator, converting her clicking speech into standard galactic common, "requires intimate knowledge of available weaponry. Today we examine projectile weapons used by various coalition species." The human in the third row shifted slightly in his seat. Marcus Chen had been part of the training program for 3 standard weeks now, ever since Earth had been granted provisional membership in the coalition. He was one of only 5 humans in the entire facility, and he had quickly learned that his species was considered something of an oddity. Humans were weak by galactic standards. They lacked natural armor, possessed no venomous capabilities, had no enhanced sensory organs, and their physical strength was laughable compared to most other species. The draft, sitting 2 rows ahead of Marcus, could lift 3 times what any human could manage. The crystalline Shenor to his left could survive in vacuum for short periods. Even the small pickies had natural electromagnetic sensing that made them excellent scouts. Humans had nothing. They were classified as a Class 7 species, the second lowest tier in the Coalition's hierarchy. Only the Yulin, a species of timid herbivores who refused all combat roles, ranked lower. Vrel activated the display screen behind her. A sleek rifle materialized in holographic form, rotating slowly for all to see. "The Korthan Pulse Rifle," she said with obvious pride. "Effective range of 2,000 meters, capable of penetrating standard combat armor at 1,500 meters. Rate of fire, 300 rounds per standard minute." Appreciative murmurs rippled through the audience. Several Korthan students sat straighter, their antennae twitching with satisfaction. The display changed. A massive cannon appeared, nearly as large as Marcus himself. The draft-heavy cannon, designed for siege warfare and anti-vehicle operations. Single shot capable of destroying a fortified position. Weight, 400 kilograms. Operated by a 2-person draft crew or a 6-person crew of smaller species. The lecture continued. Vrel showed them Shenor crystal arrays that could focus energy into devastating beams. She demonstrated Picus electromagnetic disruptors that could fry electronic systems at a distance. Each weapon was a marvel of technology, refined over centuries or millennia of warfare by species that had mastered the art of killing. Marcus took notes dutifully, though he noticed a pattern. Every weapon Vrel showed required significant technological infrastructure. They needed power cells, manufacturing facilities, rare materials, and constant maintenance. They were impressive, certainly, but they were also dependent on supply chains and industrial capacity. "Now," Vrel said, and her tone shifted slightly. Marcus had learned to recognize that change in her voice. It meant she was about to say something she considered important. "We come to the human contribution to coalition armaments." The room went quiet. Even the usual shuffling and whispered conversations stopped. Everyone wanted to hear this. Humans were new, primitive by galactic standards, and their weapons technology was centuries behind the coalition norm. The display flickered. A simple kinetic rifle appeared. Blocky and inelegant compared to the sleek designs shown earlier. "The human assault rifle," Vrel said, and Marcus could hear the faint disappointment in her translated voice. "Effective range, 500 meters. Uses chemical propellant to launch metal projectiles. Rate of fire, variable, but approximately 60 rounds per minute in semi-automatic mode. The humans call this gunpowder technology. Someone in the back rows laughed. It was quickly stifled, but Marcus heard it. His jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. He had heard worse in the 3 weeks since arriving. Primitive, Vrel continued, though her tone was not unkind. But functional within its limitations. The human weapon requires no power cells, can be manufactured with relatively simple industrial processes, and uses readily available materials. It is, however, vastly inferior in range, accuracy, and stopping power compared to modern coalition weapons. The lecture wound down. Vrel assigned reading materials and dismissed the class. Students began filing out, chattering in dozens of languages that the universal translators converted into a babble of overlapping voices. Marcus gathered his datapad and stood. He was halfway to the exit when Vrel's voice stopped him. "Trainee Chen, a moment, please." He turned. The instructor had descended from her podium and was approaching him, her forearms held in what his cultural briefing had identified as a neutral, non-threatening posture. "Yes, instructor?" Vrel's compound eyes studied him. Marcus had learned that Corthan facial expressions were subtle, requiring careful observation to read. Right now, he thought, she looked curious. "I have been reviewing your performance records," she said. "Your academic scores are excellent. Your physical capabilities are—" She paused, and Marcus braced himself for the usual comparisons. "Adequate for your species classification, but I noticed something unusual in your tactical simulations." Marcus waited. He had learned that interrupting a Corthan instructor was considered extremely rude. "You consistently perform above expected parameters in resource denial scenarios," Vrel continued. "Situations where equipment is limited or compromised. Your scores in these areas exceed those of many Class 5 and Class 6 species trainees. This is unexpected." "Thank you, instructor," Marcus said carefully. "It is not a compliment, merely an observation," Vrel replied. "However, it raises a question I have been considering. I would like to conduct an additional demonstration tomorrow during the Advanced Combat Theory session. I would like you to participate." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. Additional demonstrations usually meant being used as an example, and given humanity's lowly status in the coalition hierarchy, he suspected it would not be a flattering one. "What kind of demonstration, instructor?" "A practical exercise in improvised weaponry," Vrel said. "I want to understand how a Class 7 species approaches combat when denied access to modern technology. It will be educational for the other students to see the limitations such species face." There it was. Marcus would be the primitive human, showing everyone just how helpless his kind was without advanced technology. It was meant to be instructional, a lesson in why the Coalition's technological superiority mattered. He could refuse. Technically, participation in supplementary demonstrations was voluntary, but refusing would mark him as uncooperative, and Earth's provisional membership in the Coalition was still fragile. Humans needed to prove they could integrate, could follow orders, could be useful despite their physical limitations. "I would be honored to participate, instructor," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "Excellent." Vrel's antennae twitched in what might have been satisfaction. "Report to the demonstration arena tomorrow at the 15th hour. The scenario will be simple. I will provide you with a classroom environment containing only standard educational furniture and materials. You will have 30 standard minutes to construct any weapon or defensive tool you can manage with available resources. This will demonstrate to other students the challenges faced by primitive species in combat situations." "Understood, instructor. You may go." Marcus left the observation deck and made his way through the facility's corridors. The station was enormous, a rotating wheel in space that housed over 10,000 military trainees from across Coalition space. The architecture was deliberately neutral, designed to accommodate species with different environmental needs. The corridors were wider than necessary for humans, with varying gravity zones and atmospheric controls every few hundred meters. He reached his quarters, a small rectangular room that he shared with another human trainee named Sarah Webb. She was out, probably at the Combat Simulation Center. Marcus sat on his bunk and activated his personal data pad. The screen glowed with messages from Earth, delayed by the distance but still arriving regularly. His sister had sent pictures of her new baby. His former professor had forwarded a research paper on coalition metallurgy. His mother had sent a video message asking how he was doing and reminding him to eat properly. Marcus smiled despite his mood. He missed Earth, missed the familiarity of it. Here he was constantly reminded of humanity's inadequacy. In the cafeteria, he needed special utensils because human hands could not manage the standard coalition eating implements. In the gym, his workout weights were laughably small compared to what other species used. In classes, instructors often spoke more slowly when addressing human students, as if they were children who needed extra help. But this demonstration tomorrow felt different. It felt like Vrel was setting him up to fail publicly, to show everyone just how useless humans were without their guns and technology. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about the scenario. A classroom with standard furniture, 30 minutes to create a weapon or defensive tool. His mind began to work through the problem. What would a coalition classroom contain? Chairs, certainly, though not designed for human proportions. Tables or desks. Probably some kind of display technology. Writing implements, though those varied wildly between species. Storage containers for educational materials. What could he make with that? The obvious answer was a club. Take a chair leg, break it off, and swing it. Simple, brutal, and exactly what Vrel probably expected. It would confirm everyone's assumptions about primitive species. Give them sticks, and they will hit things with sticks. But Marcus had not scored high in resource denial scenarios by being obvious. He opened his data pad and began researching. Coalition educational standards were public information, available to all trainees. He pulled up specifications for classroom furniture, looking for materials, dimensions, and construction methods. Standard chairs were made from a polymer composite, strong but relatively lightweight. They were designed to support species ranging from 50 to 300 kilograms. The legs were hollow tubes, attached to the seat with mechanical fasteners. Tables were similar, but larger and sturdier. The surfaces were typically smooth plastic or treated wood analog, depending on the species' preferences. Some classrooms had adjustable height tables to accommodate different body types. Writing implements varied, but most classrooms kept supplies of multiple types. Marking tools, styluses for electronic pads, even primitive graphite pencils for species that preferred tactile feedback. Marcus made notes, his mind racing through possibilities. He thought about physics, about leverage and energy storage. He thought about materials science, about stress points and failure modes. He thought about history, about humanity's long and bloody experience with violence. Humans were not strong. They were not fast. They had no natural weapons, no claws or fangs or venomous stings. But humans were clever. Humans were adaptable. And humans had been killing each other with improvised weapons for hundreds of thousands of years before they ever developed gunpowder. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind. It was risky, it might not work, but if it did, it would show the coalition something important about humans. They did not need to be strong to be dangerous. He spent the next 3 hours researching, calculating, and planning. By the time Sarah returned from her simulation exercises, Marcus had filled his data pad with notes and diagrams. "You look intense," Sarah observed, dropping onto her own bunk with a tired sigh. "What's going on?" Marcus told her about Vrel's demonstration. Sarah listened, her expression growing darker as he explained. "So she's going to humiliate you in front of everyone," Sarah said when he finished. "Show the primitive human trying to make a stick weapon like a caveman." "That's what she expects," Marcus agreed. "And you're planning something different." It was not a question. Sarah knew him well enough after 3 weeks of close quarters. "I'm planning to surprise her," Marcus said. "Is that wise? I mean, we're supposed to be keeping our heads down, proving we can follow orders and integrate properly." "I am following orders," Marcus pointed out. "She told me to create a weapon with available resources. She didn't say it had to be a simple weapon. She didn't say it had to be what she expected." Sarah considered this. Then she grinned. "You're going to show off." "I'm going to demonstrate human capability," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." "If you say so. What are you planning?" Marcus told her. As he explained, Sarah's grin widened. "That's either brilliant or insane," she said when he finished. "Possibly both." "It will work," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. "The math checks out. The materials should handle the stress. It just requires precision and good timing. And if it doesn't work, then I look like an idiot who couldn't even make a proper club and humanity's reputation drops another notch," Marcus admitted. "But if it does work, maybe people will start taking us more seriously." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Do it. Show them what humans can do." Marcus slept poorly that night. His dreams were filled with calculations and stress analyses, with trajectories and energy transfers. He woke before his alarm, showered in the cramped human-sized bathroom, and dressed carefully in his trainee uniform. The day's regular classes seemed to drag on forever. Marcus tried to focus on the lectures about coalition logistics and supply chain management, but his mind kept wandering to the demonstration. He rehearsed the steps mentally, visualizing each movement, checking his calculations again and again. Finally, the 14th hour arrived. Marcus made his way to the demonstration arena, his heart pounding. The observation deck was even more crowded than usual. Word had spread that Instructor Vrel was conducting a special demonstration, and students from multiple programs had arrived to watch. Marcus descended to the arena floor. Vrel was waiting for him, along with 2 assistant instructors he did not recognize. The arena had been reconfigured since yesterday. A transparent barrier now divided the space, creating a sealed section about 10 meters square. Inside that section, someone had arranged standard classroom furniture: 4 chairs, 2 tables, a storage cabinet, and a wall-mounted display screen. "Trainee Chen," Vrel greeted him. "Thank you for your participation. The rules are simple. You will enter the enclosed area. You will have 30 standard minutes to construct any weapon or tool you deem useful using only the materials present. At the end of that time, you will demonstrate your creation's functionality. Do you understand?" "Yes, instructor." "Do you have any questions?" Marcus looked at the furniture through the transparent barrier. "Am I allowed to explain my reasoning during the demonstration?" Vrel's antennae twitched. "If you wish. This is an educational exercise. Explanation would be valuable." "Then I have no other questions, instructor." "You may begin when ready." Marcus stepped through the barrier entrance. It sealed behind him with a soft hiss, and a timer appeared on the wall display. 30 minutes, counting down. The observation deck fell silent. Hundreds of eyes from dozens of species watched the lone human standing among the classroom furniture. Marcus took a deep breath, looked up at the watching crowd, and smiled. Then he grabbed the nearest chair and got to work. Marcus moved with deliberate purpose through the enclosed demonstration area. The timer on the wall continued its countdown, but he refused to let it pressure him into mistakes. Speed mattered less than precision. He started with the chair he had grabbed. The Coalition standard classroom chair was designed to accommodate multiple species body types, which meant it had to be adjustable and modular. Marcus examined the joints where the legs connected to the seat. As he had hoped, they used simple mechanical fasteners rather than permanent bonding. The designers wanted furniture that could be easily repaired or reconfigured. Using the edge of the table, Marcus leveraged one chair leg free. The polymer composite separated from the seat with a satisfying crack. The leg was hollow, lightweight, but surprisingly rigid, about 70 centimeters long and 3 centimeters in diameter. Perfect. Through the transparent barrier, he could hear murmuring from the observation deck. The assembled students were probably thinking exactly what Vrel had expected. The primitive human was making a club. How predictable. How limited. Marcus smiled to himself and kept working. He freed 3 more chair legs, examining each one carefully. 2 of them had slight curves that made them unsuitable for his purpose. He set those aside. The other 2 were straight and true. He now had 2 good legs, plus the original one. 3 pieces to work with. Next, he turned his attention to the storage cabinet. It was a standard design with sliding doors and internal shelving. Marcus opened it and found exactly what he had expected. Educational supplies. There were data pads, styluses, marking implements, and several coils of what appeared to be synthetic cord used for bundling materials. The cord was crucial. Marcus pulled out the longest coil he could find, testing its strength by looping it around his hands and pulling hard. The material stretched slightly but did not break. He estimated it could handle at least 50 kilograms of tension before failure. That would work, though he would need to be careful not to exceed that limit. He also found a container of adhesive putty, the kind used to temporarily attach materials to walls or displays. It was not particularly strong, but it would serve as a binding agent if he needed it. Marcus carried his materials to one of the tables and laid everything out systematically. 2 straight chair legs, 1 coil of synthetic cord, adhesive putty. He looked at the remaining furniture, considering what else he might need. The table itself provided the next component. The surface was made of smooth polymer composite, similar to the chairs but in larger sheets. Marcus ran his hand along the edge, feeling for weak points. Tables were designed to be sturdy, but they also needed to be lightweight enough for students to move when rearranging classroom configurations. He positioned himself at one corner of the table and brought his heel down hard on the surface overhang. The polymer flexed but did not break. Marcus tried again, this time jumping slightly to add more force. On the 3rd attempt, he felt the material begin to crack. The sound echoed through the demonstration arena. More murmuring from above. Marcus glanced at the timer. 12 minutes had elapsed. He was making good progress, but he needed to maintain focus. He continued working on the table corner, using controlled strikes to propagate the crack he had started. The polymer was tough, but it was not designed to withstand concentrated impacts. After several more attempts, a triangular section about 20 centimeters on each side separated from the table. Marcus picked up the broken piece and examined it critically. The edges were sharp where the material had fractured. That was actually useful. He used the edge of the triangle to scrape and smooth one of the chair legs, creating a shallow groove about 5 centimeters from one end. Through the barrier, Instructor Vrel's voice came through the speakers. "Trainee Chen, would you care to explain what you are constructing?" Marcus looked up at the observation deck. He could see Vrel standing at the podium, her forearms held in a posture of professional interest. Around her, hundreds of students from dozens of species watched with varying expressions of curiosity, amusement, or disdain. "I'm building a bow, Instructor," Marcus said calmly. Silence fell over the observation deck. Then the murmuring returned, louder than before. Marcus heard fragments of translated speech filtering through the barrier. A bow? What is a bow? Some kind of primitive human weapon, I think. Why would anyone use such a thing? Vrel's antennae twitched in what Marcus had learned to recognize as surprise. Please elaborate, Trainee Chen. For those unfamiliar with human military history. Marcus picked up one of the straight chair legs and held it up so everyone could see. A bow is a ranged weapon that uses elastic deformation to store and release energy. Humans developed various forms of bow technology thousands of years before we achieved spaceflight. They remained militarily relevant even after the introduction of gunpowder weapons because of their specific advantages in certain contexts. He turned the chair leg horizontally, miming drawing back a bowstring. The basic principle is simple. You bend a flexible rod into an arc shape using a string. When you pull the string back, you store energy in the bent rod. When you release the string, that energy transfers to a projectile, sending it forward at high velocity. And you believe you can construct such a weapon from classroom furniture? Vrel asked. Her tone was neutral, but Marcus detected genuine curiosity beneath it. Yes, instructor. The materials are not ideal, but they're workable. The chair legs are made from polymer composite with good elastic properties. The synthetic cord has adequate tensile strength. With proper construction, I should be able to create a functional bow with an effective range of 30 to 40 meters and sufficient force to penetrate light armor or cause significant injury to unprotected targets. The murmuring intensified. Marcus heard several voices expressing skepticism. Impossible. 30 meters with furniture pieces? The human is overestimating. Typical Class 7 delusions of capability. Marcus returned to his work, letting his actions speak louder than words. He took the chair leg he had prepared and began wrapping the synthetic cord around the grooved end. He wound it carefully, layer upon layer, using the groove to prevent slippage. When he had built up sufficient thickness, he applied adhesive putty to lock the cord in place. The process required patience. Marcus worked methodically, blocking out the watching crowd and the ticking timer. His hands moved with practiced precision, drawing on muscle memory from a hobby most people would have considered antiquated. Marcus's grandfather had been an archery enthusiast back on Earth. As a child, Marcus had spent countless hours at his grandfather's ranch, learning to craft and shoot traditional bows. The old man had insisted that understanding the principles of ancient weapons provided insight into physics, materials science, and human ingenuity. At the time, Marcus had thought it was just a way for his grandfather to justify his unusual hobby. Now, standing in an alien demonstration arena, he silently thanked the old man for those lessons. He secured the cord at both ends of the chair leg, creating attachment points approximately 65 centimeters apart. The bow limb was taking shape. Marcus tested the flexibility by carefully bending the leg, watching how the polymer composite responded to stress. Good. The material curved smoothly without signs of immediate failure. He would need to be careful not to overdraw the bow, but it should handle reasonable tension. Next came the critical part, creating the bowstring. Marcus took the remaining synthetic cord and began braiding it, creating a stronger composite line from multiple strands. His fingers worked quickly, weaving the pattern his grandfather had taught him decades ago. The timer showed 8 minutes remaining. Marcus felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment. He was cutting it close, but rushing now would ruin everything. He completed the bowstring and tied secure loops at both ends. Then he attached one loop to the lower attachment point on the bow limb. The upper end he left free for now. He would string the bow at the last moment to avoid unnecessary stress on the materials. Marcus turned his attention to creating arrows. This was where improvisation became crucial. Traditional arrows required straight shafts, fletching for stability, and points for penetration. He had materials for shafts and points, but fletching would be difficult. He took the triangular piece of table surface he had broken off earlier and used the sharp edge to split it into smaller fragments. By applying pressure carefully at stress points, he created 3 narrow slivers of polymer, each about 15 centimeters long and tapered to a sharp point. For arrow shafts, he used the 2 curved chair legs he had set aside earlier. They were not ideal, but they would serve. Marcus examined them carefully, selecting the straightest sections he could find. Using the edge of the polymer fragments, he scored and broke the chair legs at appropriate lengths, creating 3 shaft pieces about 50 centimeters long each. He attached the pointed polymer slivers to the shaft ends using adhesive putty and cord wrapping. The result was crude by any traditional standard, but Marcus had created recognizable arrows. They lacked fletching, which would reduce their accuracy and range, but they should fly reasonably straight over short distances. The timer showed 3 minutes remaining. Marcus quickly carved small notches in the rear end of each arrow shaft. These notches would fit against the bowstring, preventing the arrow from slipping during the draw. He worked as fast as he dared, shaving polymer with the sharp edge of his improvised tools. 2 minutes. He gathered his materials: the bow limb, the bowstring, and 3 crude arrows. Everything was ready. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing his racing heart to slow. This was the moment of truth. 1 minute. Marcus carefully bent the bow limb into an arc, fighting against the resistance of the polymer composite. The material creaked but held. He quickly slipped the free loop of the bowstring over the upper attachment point, securing it in place. The bow was strung. Marcus held it up, examining his work critically. The curve was not perfect, and the limb showed slight asymmetry, but the basic structure was sound. The synthetic cord was taut, held in place by the bent bow limb. 30 seconds. Marcus knocked one of his improvised arrows against the bowstring, feeling the familiar weight and balance. His hands remembered the proper grip despite years of disuse. He raised the bow, drew back the string slowly, feeling the energy build in the bent limb. The timer reached 0 and emitted a soft chime. Marcus lowered the bow and turned to face Instructor Vrel. Through the transparent barrier, he could see that the observation deck was completely silent. Every student was leaning forward, staring at him with various alien expressions that he interpreted as intense focus. Vrel's voice came through the speakers. "Trainee Chen, you have completed your construction. Please demonstrate the functionality of your weapon." "Yes, Instructor. I'll need a target." There was a brief pause. Then one of the assistant instructors activated a control panel. A holographic target materialized at the far end of the demonstration arena, about 25 meters from Marcus's position. It was a standard combat silhouette designed to represent a Class 5 species torso. Marcus studied the target, calculating angles and estimating force. The arrows were unbalanced without fletching, which would cause them to tumble in flight. He would need to account for that with his aim, shooting slightly high and to the right to compensate for the expected deviation. He raised the bow again, knocked the first arrow, and drew back the string. The synthetic cord cut slightly into his fingers, and he felt the chair leg bow limb bending further as he increased tension. He aimed carefully, letting his instincts guide the subtle adjustments. Then he released. The synthetic cord snapped forward with a sharp twang. The arrow leaped from the bow, crossing the distance to the target in a fraction of a second. Without fletching, it wobbled slightly in flight, but Marcus's compensation was accurate. The improvised arrow struck the holographic target in the center mass, passing completely through the light projection and embedding itself in the wall, padding beyond with a solid thunk. The observation deck erupted in shocked exclamations. Marcus heard dozens of voices speaking simultaneously in multiple languages, all expressing variations of surprise and disbelief. He calmly knocked his second arrow. This time he aimed for the target's upper section, adjusting his angle based on what he had learned from the first shot. He drew, aimed, and released. The second arrow struck high and slightly left, still well within lethal range for most species. The third arrow he saved. Instead of shooting at the distant target, Marcus turned to face Vrel directly. Through the transparent barrier, he could see her compound eyes fixed on him with complete attention. "Instructor," he called out, "may I explain the tactical applications of this weapon system?" There was a long pause. Then Vrel's antennae moved in what Marcus had learned was the Korthan equivalent of a nod. "Please proceed, Trainee Chen. I believe everyone here would benefit from understanding what we have just witnessed." Marcus lowered the bow, but kept the third arrow nocked. The bow represents a weapon system that addresses several critical problems faced by infantry forces, particularly those operating in resource-denied environments or behind enemy lines. He began counting on his fingers. First, it requires no manufactured ammunition or power cells. I created functional projectiles from classroom furniture in under 30 minutes. In a field environment with access to wood, stone, or bone, an experienced operator could produce dozens of arrows daily using only hand tools. He held up the bow. Second, the weapon itself can be constructed from readily available materials using minimal tools. This bow is crude because I had limited time and resources. With proper materials and a few hours of work, I could create something much more effective. Historical human bows had ranges exceeding 200 meters with significant armor penetration at close range. Marcus noticed that several students were taking notes on their data pads. Good. They were paying attention. Third, the bow is nearly silent compared to chemical or energy weapons. I could engage targets without revealing my position to distant enemies. This makes it valuable for ambush tactics, scouting operations, or guerrilla warfare. He pointed to the arrow embedded in the wall. Fourth, the projectiles are retrievable and reusable. Unlike bullets or energy weapon charges, arrows can often be recovered from targets and fired again. This extends operational capability in situations where resupply is impossible. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. The observation deck remained remarkably quiet. He had their full attention now. Finally, he continued, the bow requires no technological infrastructure to maintain. It cannot be disabled by electromagnetic pulses. It produces no heat signature for detection systems to track. It functions in any atmosphere that allows the operator to survive. A soldier with a bow can operate independently for extended periods without any support from their military organization. He raised the bow again, demonstrating the draw motion. These advantages come with significant disadvantages, of course. Limited range compared to modern weapons, lower rate of fire, requires substantial training and physical conditioning to use effectively, vulnerable to environmental factors like wind and rain. But in specific tactical situations, particularly unconventional warfare scenarios, these weapons remain relevant despite their apparent primitiveness. Marcus lowered the bow and looked directly at Vrel. Humans developed and refined bow technology over approximately 50,000 years, instructor. We use these weapons to hunt, to wage war, and to survive in environments that should have killed us. When I was asked to create a weapon from limited resources, I drew on that deep well of human experience, not because we are primitive, but because we are adaptable. The silence stretched out. Marcus could not read the expressions of most species in the observation deck, but he saw Korthan antennae twitching, draft mandibles clicking thoughtfully, and Shenor crystalline structures pulsing with what he had learned was their equivalent of surprise. Finally, Vrel spoke. Trainee Chen, I must confess that I expected you to create a simple impact weapon, a club perhaps, or a crude spear. You have significantly exceeded my expectations. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Thank you, instructor. However, Vrel continued, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten. There was always a however. I have questions about the practical effectiveness of such a weapon against modern armor and shielding systems. Your demonstration was impressive, but the target was unprotected. Would this bow penetrate standard coalition combat armor? It was a fair question. Marcus considered his answer carefully. At close range, possibly. Historical human bows could penetrate some types of metal armor. The arrows I created are suboptimal, but with proper arrowheads made from harder materials, yes. I believe penetration of standard armor would be possible at ranges under 20 meters. And against energy shields? Physical projectiles actually have advantages against certain shield types, Marcus replied. Many energy shields are designed to disperse or absorb high-velocity energy weapon fire. They're less effective against slower-moving physical objects. An arrow traveling at 60 meters per second might actually slip through shields that would easily stop a pulse rifle shot. This triggered another wave of murmuring through the observation deck. Marcus saw several instructors conferring among themselves, their body language suggesting animated discussion. The demonstration arena remained sealed around Marcus as the discussion in the observation deck grew more animated. He could see clusters of students from different species engaged in heated conversations, their translators working overtime to convert the babel of languages into comprehensible speech. Instructor Vrel raised one of her 4 arms, calling for silence. The gesture was effective. The observation deck quieted within seconds, all attention returning to the Korthan instructor. "Trainee Chen," Vrel said, her translated voice carrying through the speakers. "I have an additional test for you, if you are willing." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Additional tests could go either way. They might provide opportunities to further prove human capability, or they might expose limitations and failures. "I'm willing, instructor." "Excellent." Vrel turned to address the observation deck. As Trainee Chen noted, his demonstration used an unprotected target. To properly evaluate the effectiveness of this primitive weapon system, we should test it against actual defensive equipment. One of the assistant instructors disappeared from view. Moments later, a door at the side of the demonstration arena opened. A mechanical loader rolled in, carrying a standard coalition combat armor vest on a support frame. The loader positioned the armor at approximately 15 meters from Marcus's position, then retreated. The armor was designed for Class 5 species, which meant it was built to protect individuals considerably larger and stronger than humans. The vest was constructed from layered composite plates designed to absorb and distribute impact force while also providing resistance to energy weapon fire. It was not the heaviest armor in the Coalition arsenal, but it was standard issue for most infantry units. "Trainee Chen," Vrel announced, "you have 1 arrow remaining. Please demonstrate whether your weapon can defeat standard combat armor at a practical engagement distance." Marcus examined the armor vest on its frame. 15 meters was a reasonable distance for the test, close enough that his crude arrows might achieve sufficient velocity, but far enough to represent a realistic combat scenario. The problem was that his final arrow was already suboptimal. The polymer point was not designed for armor penetration. It was too light, too broad, and too soft. Against unprotected flesh, it would cause damage through impact and laceration. Against hardened composite armor, it would probably shatter on contact. But refusing the test was not an option. Marcus had come too far, had already demonstrated too much to back down now. He needed to commit fully to showing what humans were capable of, even if failure was likely. He raised the bow, nocked his final arrow, and studied the armor carefully. The vest had overlapping plates designed to protect vital organs while allowing mobility. The plates overlapped at the edges, creating small gaps where flexibility was necessary. Those gaps would be the weak points, but they were narrow targets, especially at 15 meters with an unbalanced arrow. Marcus drew the bowstring back, feeling the familiar tension in his arms and shoulders. He sighted along the arrow shaft, compensating mentally for the wobble he knew would occur in flight. He aimed for the largest gap he could identify, a space between the chest and shoulder plates where the armor needed to flex for arm movement. He controlled his breathing, letting his body settle into the shooting stance his grandfather had drilled into him years ago. Feet shoulder-width apart, back straight, elbow high, draw hand anchored at the corner of his jaw. The observation deck was completely silent. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy watched one human with a weapon made from broken furniture attempting to defeat modern military technology with principles older than human civilization. Marcus released the arrow. The synthetic bowstring snapped forward. The polymer composite limb straightened, transferring its stored energy into the arrow shaft. The projectile leaped forward, wobbling slightly as it crossed the distance to the armored target. For a moment, Marcus thought he had missed entirely. The arrow's trajectory was less stable than his previous shots, the unbalanced weight distribution causing it to yaw in flight. Then, with a sharp crack, the arrow struck the armor. Marcus could not tell immediately whether it had penetrated. The impact point was hidden by the angle of the vest. He lowered the bow and waited, his heart pounding. Vrel activated a control, and the mechanical loader rotated the armor vest slowly, displaying it from all angles. The observation deck remained silent as everyone strained to see the result. The arrow had struck the gap between plates exactly where Marcus had aimed. The polymer point had not shattered as he had feared. Instead, it had penetrated the flexible material that filled the armor gap, designed to be tough enough to stop shrapnel, but not rigid like the main plates. The arrow shaft protruded from the armor at an angle, embedded perhaps 3 centimeters deep. It was not a complete penetration. The arrow had not gone through the armor entirely, but it had defeated the defensive system enough to potentially reach the body beneath. Against an actual living target, it might have caused a disabling injury. The silence broke. The observation deck erupted in noise. Marcus heard exclamations of surprise, arguments about what the result meant, and questions shouted in multiple languages. Vrel raised her arms again, calling for order. When the noise subsided, she spoke with careful deliberation. Trainee Chen has successfully demonstrated that his improvised weapon system can partially defeat standard combat armor. The penetration is not complete, but it would likely result in a casualty. This is remarkable. Marcus noticed her antennae were twitching rapidly, a sign of significant cognitive processing. She was re-evaluating something, probably her assumptions about human capabilities. Trainee Chen, Vrel continued, please explain how you achieved this result. What principles allowed a weapon constructed from furniture to threaten modern military equipment? Marcus set down the bow carefully. His arms were beginning to ache from the repeated draws, and he needed a moment to organize his thoughts. Instructor, the principles are not complex, but they require understanding physics at a fundamental level. Modern coalition weapons are sophisticated, but they operate on the same basic principles that govern all projectile weapons: mass, velocity, and energy transfer. He walked over to the armored vest, gesturing at the embedded arrow. This arrow has relatively low mass, perhaps 100 grams. It achieved a velocity of approximately 60 meters per second at release, though it slowed somewhat over the 15-meter distance. That gives it a kinetic energy of roughly 180 joules at impact. Marcus pointed to where the arrow had penetrated. By itself, that energy is insufficient to defeat the main armor plates, which are designed to withstand pulse rifle shots carrying several thousand joules. However, by concentrating all that energy into a very small area, the pointed tip, I created localized stress that exceeded the material's resistance threshold. He turned to face the observation deck. This is the principle behind all armor-penetrating weapons, ancient or modern. You don't need overwhelming force if you can concentrate what force you have into a small enough area. A sharp point delivers all its energy to a few square millimeters of target material, creating pressures that can defeat armor much stronger than the projectile itself. Several students were taking notes frantically. Others were engaged in intense discussions with their neighbors. Marcus could see that his demonstration had challenged assumptions about primitive versus advanced technology. "But, Trainee Chen," one of the students called out, a draft from the upper rows, "your weapon requires significant skill to use effectively. My pulse rifle needs only basic training and can fire 300 times per minute." Why would any modern military force consider using such primitive technology? It was the question Marcus had been waiting for. "You're absolutely right," he said, nodding to the draft student. "In conventional warfare with full supply chains and technological support, your pulse rifle is vastly superior to my bow. But consider these scenarios." Marcus began counting on his fingers. Scenario 1. Your unit is inserted behind enemy lines for a reconnaissance mission. After 3 days, your power cells are exhausted. Your pulse rifle is now an expensive club. Meanwhile, a soldier with a bow can manufacture ammunition from local materials and continue operating indefinitely. Scenario 2. Your unit faces an enemy with advanced electronic warfare capabilities. They deploy electromagnetic pulse weapons that destroy all your electronic equipment, including the targeting systems and power cells in your weapons. Suddenly, you're defenseless. A bow doesn't care about electromagnetic pulses. Scenario 3. You're a guerrilla fighter facing an occupation force with superior technology and industrial capacity. You cannot match their production of advanced weapons, but you can manufacture bows and arrows in hidden workshops using simple tools and materials. You can conduct hit-and-run attacks, then disappear into the population, leaving no technological signature for enemy sensors to track. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. These scenarios are not hypothetical, instructor. Human military history is filled with examples of technologically inferior forces defeating superior enemies by exploiting environmental factors, supply chain vulnerabilities, and the inherent weaknesses of complex systems. Another voice called out, this time, a crystalline Shanor. But surely no modern military force would actually equip soldiers with such primitive weapons. Marcus smiled. That's where you're wrong. Even before Earth joined the coalition, our military forces maintained specialized units trained in survival and improvisation techniques. They learned to construct weapons from available materials, to navigate without electronic equipment, and to operate independently of technological infrastructure. We called them special forces or survival experts. He gestured at the bow lying on the floor. This demonstration took me 30 minutes because I was working with suboptimal materials under time pressure. Give me a day, proper tools, and access to appropriate materials, and I could construct a bow with an effective range of 100 meters and armor penetration comparable to your pulse rifles at close range. Give me a week, and I could train a team of soldiers to use them effectively. The questions continued. Students asked about rate of fire, about training requirements, about historical human battles where bows had proven decisive. Marcus answered each question patiently, drawing on his knowledge of history and his grandfather's lessons about traditional weapons. Throughout it all, Instructor Vrel remained silent, her compound eyes fixed on Marcus with unwavering attention. Her antennae twitched occasionally, processing information and adjusting her understanding of this unexpected human capability. Finally, after nearly an hour of discussion, Vrel called for silence once more. Trainee Chen, you have provided a valuable lesson today. You have demonstrated that ingenuity and adaptability can sometimes compensate for technological limitations. You have shown that dismissing a species' capabilities based solely on their classification may lead to underestimating their potential threat or value. She paused, and Marcus thought he detected something like approval in her posture. However, I must also note that your demonstration revealed something else, something perhaps more important than the weapon itself. What is that, instructor? You demonstrated that humans possess deep institutional knowledge of low-technology warfare. Your species has not forgotten how to survive and fight without modern equipment. This suggests that humans, despite their physical limitations and low classification, may possess valuable expertise in unconventional combat that could benefit the Coalition. Marcus felt a surge of pride. This was exactly what he had hoped to achieve, to show that humans brought something valuable to the Coalition beyond just numbers or resource production. But Vrel was not finished. I will be filing a report with the Coalition Military Assessment Committee recommending that human trainees be evaluated for potential roles in specialized units, focusing on survival and improvisation training. It appears that your species' long history of technological development has given you perspectives that may be unique in the galactic community. The observation deck erupted in applause. It started with a few individuals, then spread rapidly through the assembled students. Marcus heard the various sounds different species made to express approval: Corthan antenna rattling, Draff mandible clicking, Shenor crystalline chiming, and dozens of other alien expressions of respect. Marcus stood in the demonstration arena, surrounded by the evidence of his improvised creation, and felt something shift in the atmosphere. The other students were no longer looking at him with pity or dismissive amusement. They were looking at him with interest, with curiosity, and in some cases, with something that might have been respect. The barrier deactivated, and Marcus was allowed to exit the arena. As he made his way toward the observation deck entrance, several students approached him. A young Corthan trainee asked if humans could really manufacture arrows from bone and stone. Apicus wanted to know if electromagnetic fields would affect arrow flight. Even the Draff, who had questioned the weapon's practicality, admitted that he had never considered the logistics vulnerabilities of modern weapon systems. Marcus answered their questions, enjoying the genuine intellectual curiosity they displayed. This was what he had hoped for when Earth had joined the Coalition: real exchange of ideas, recognition of different forms of expertise, and mutual respect between species. Sarah Webb found him in the corridor outside the demonstration arena. She was grinning widely. "You absolute madman," she said, gripping his shoulder. "I thought you were going to embarrass yourself, and instead you made every other species in there question their assumptions about humans." "I just showed them what we can do," Marcus said modestly. "You did more than that. You showed them that being classified as Class 7 doesn't mean we're helpless. You showed them that humanity's long history of warfare and survival gave us knowledge that most species never developed because they jumped straight to advanced technology." Marcus considered this. She was right, in a way. Most Coalition species had relatively short histories of technological development. They had discovered advanced power generation, weapon systems, and space travel within a few thousand years of achieving agriculture. Humans had spent hundreds of thousands of years slowly climbing the technological ladder, developing and refining techniques at every level. That long, slow climb had given humanity a deep well of knowledge that more rapidly advanced species lacked. They knew how to work metal because they had spent millennia doing it before discovering fusion reactors. They knew how to construct weapons from natural materials because they had spent tens of thousands of years hunting with such tools. They knew how to navigate by stars because they had sailed oceans for centuries before developing GPS. Coalition species saw this as primitiveness, as evidence of human limitations. But perhaps it was actually a unique strength, a form of resilience and adaptability that came from having climbed every rung of the technological ladder rather than skipping steps. "What do you think Vrel will put in her report?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the cafeteria. "Hopefully something that helps Earth's position in the Coalition," Marcus said. "Right now, we're provisional members with limited rights. If the Coalition starts to see us as valuable contributors rather than primitive charity cases, that could change." They entered the cafeteria, a massive space designed to accommodate thousands of students with varying dietary requirements. The usual dinner crowd was already gathering, with species-specific food stations serving meals appropriate for different biochemistries. As Marcus and Sarah made their way toward the human-compatible food section, Marcus noticed something different. Other students were looking at him, pointing him out to their companions, discussing something with animated gestures. Word of the demonstration had spread quickly through the facility's social networks. A group of Corthan students approached their table as Marcus and Sarah sat down with their meal trays. The leader, a young male with bright green carapace markings, addressed Marcus directly. "Trainee Chen, I hope we are not interrupting your meal," the Corthan said, his translated voice carrying appropriate tones of respect. "My cohort and I witnessed your demonstration today. We found it highly educational. We were wondering if you would be willing to provide additional instruction on human improvised weapon systems." Marcus exchanged a glance with Sarah. This was unexpected. "I'm just a trainee like you," he said carefully. "I don't have authorization to conduct formal instruction sessions." Of course, the Corthan agreed quickly. "We were thinking of something informal, perhaps a discussion during free time where you could explain the principles and history of such weapons. Many of us have never considered the tactical applications of pre-technological warfare. Your demonstration revealed significant gaps in our understanding." Marcus thought about it. This could be an opportunity to build bridges, to show more coalition students that humans had valuable knowledge to share. "I'd be happy to discuss it with you," he said finally. "How about tomorrow evening, in one of the common areas?" The Corthan's antennae vibrated with pleasure. "Excellent. We will gather interested students and meet you in Common Area 7 at the 20th hour. Thank you, Trainee Chen." As the Corthan group departed, Sarah chuckled. "You're going to end up teaching a class on primitive weapons to aliens. Your grandfather would be so proud." "I think he would be," Marcus agreed, smiling at the thought. "He always said that knowledge is never wasted, even knowledge that seems obsolete. I guess he was right." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Sarah spoke again, her tone more serious. "Marcus, do you think this will really make a difference? One impressive demonstration doesn't change Earth's status in the Coalition. We're still Class 7, still considered primitive and weak." Marcus considered the question carefully. "No, one demonstration won't change everything. But it's a start. Before today, most students here saw humans as helpless, barely capable of surviving without advanced technology. Now at least some of them are questioning that assumption. They're wondering what other capabilities we might have that they've overlooked." He took a drink before continuing. "The Coalition's classification system is based primarily on physical capabilities and technological advancement. But there are other forms of strength, other types of knowledge that don't fit neatly into their categories. Humans are adaptable. We're persistent. We have a long memory and deep institutional knowledge spanning hundreds of thousands of years of development. That has to count for something." "I hope you're right," Sarah said, "because Earth needs the Coalition to take us seriously. Our provisional membership expires in 2 standard years. If we haven't proven our value by then, we could be denied full membership status." Marcus had not forgotten that deadline. Earth's admission to the Coalition had been controversial from the start. Many member species had argued that humans were too primitive, too violent, too unstable to be granted membership. Earth had been accepted only on provisional terms, with the understanding that they would need to demonstrate their worth. Military service was part of that demonstration. Humans like Marcus and Sarah, volunteering for Coalition military training, were showing that Earth could contribute to collective defense. But they needed to show more than just willingness. They needed to prove capability. "We'll prove our value," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. Today was just the beginning. We'll show them what humans can do, one demonstration at a time if necessary. The next morning, Marcus found his datapad filled with messages. Some were from fellow human trainees congratulating him on the demonstration. Others were from students of various species asking questions about bow technology, human military history, or improvised weapons. There was even a message from an instructor he did not recognize, asking if he would be willing to give a presentation to an advanced tactics class. But the most surprising message came from Instructor Vrel herself. It was brief and formal. "Trainee Chen, please report to my office at the 10th hour today. We have matters to discuss regarding your future role in the training program." Marcus showed the message to Sarah over breakfast. She raised her eyebrows. That could be good or bad. Either she wants to expand your involvement, or she's going to reprimand you for showing off. Only one way to find out, Marcus said. At precisely the 10th hour, Marcus presented himself at Vrel's office. The door slid open at his approach, revealing a space designed for Corthan proportions. Everything was slightly too large for human comfort, from the desk to the chairs to the ceiling height. Vrel was working at her desk, her forearms moving across multiple data displays simultaneously. She gestured for Marcus to enter without looking up. "Trainee Chen, thank you for your punctuality. Please, sit." Marcus settled into one of the chairs, his feet barely touching the floor. He waited silently while Vrel finished whatever she was working on. Finally, she turned her full attention to him. Her compound eyes studied him for a long moment before she spoke. "Trainee Chen, I have been reviewing your complete file since yesterday's demonstration. Your academic performance is excellent. Your physical conditioning scores are above average for your species. Your tactical simulation results show consistent creativity and problem-solving, particularly in resource-constrained scenarios." She paused. "However, I also note that you have been subject to dismissive treatment from some instructors and fellow students. Your species classification has resulted in lowered expectations and, in some cases, inappropriate assumptions about your capabilities." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I've experienced some challenges, instructor, but nothing I couldn't handle." "That may be true, but it represents a systematic problem with how the Coalition approaches Class 7 and Class 6 species," Vrel said bluntly. "We assume that technological advancement and physical capability are the only meaningful measures of military potential. Yesterday, you demonstrated that this assumption is flawed." She activated a display showing the video recording of his demonstration. The bow, the arrows, the penetration of the combat armor. "I have sent this recording to the Coalition Military Assessment Committee along with a detailed analysis. I have recommended that the committee reevaluate how they assess species capabilities, particularly for humans." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. "What kind of reevaluation, instructor?" "Humans should not be classified as Class 7, Vrel said firmly. "That classification is based primarily on physical strength and natural defenses. It does not account for cognitive flexibility, adaptability, or the deep institutional knowledge your species possesses. I have recommended that humans be reclassified as Class 5, with a special designation for unconventional warfare expertise." Marcus struggled to process this. Class 5 was typically reserved for species like the Corthan themselves, species with significant military capability and respected martial traditions. Jumping from Class 7 to Class 5 would completely change how humans were perceived in the Coalition. "Instructor, I don't know what to say. That's an incredible recommendation." "It is a warranted recommendation based on observed evidence," Vrel corrected. "However, I must be honest with you about the likelihood of success. The committee is conservative and resistant to change. Many member species have invested political capital in maintaining the current classification system. Your demonstration, while impressive, may not be sufficient to overcome institutional resistance." She leaned forward slightly. "That is why I am offering you an opportunity, Trainee Chen. I want you to participate in a series of additional demonstrations and evaluations. I want to document human capabilities across multiple domains: improvised weapons, survival skills, tactical adaptation, and unconventional warfare. If we can provide comprehensive evidence of human expertise, we may be able to force the committee to reconsider their position. Marcus understood what she was offering. This was a chance to not just prove himself, but to prove humanity's worth to the entire coalition. It was also a significant risk. If he failed, if he could not consistently demonstrate the capabilities Vrel was claiming for humans, it would reinforce existing prejudices and make Earth's position even more precarious. But how could he refuse? This was exactly the opportunity Earth needed. "I would be honored to participate, Instructor," Marcus said. "What do you need me to do?" Vrel's antennae twitched in satisfaction. "Excellent. We will begin next week with a comprehensive evaluation of human survival capabilities. You will be placed in a simulated hostile environment with minimal equipment and required to survive for 5 standard days while completing specific objectives. After that, we will conduct evaluations of hand-to-hand combat techniques, tactical planning, and improvised equipment construction." She pulled up a schedule on her display. "This will require significant time and effort above your normal training duties. You will need to maintain your academic performance while also participating in these special evaluations. It will not be easy." "I understand, Instructor. I'm ready." "Good." Vrel stood, indicating the meeting was concluded. "I will send you the detailed schedule and preparation requirements." "Dismissed, Trainee Chen." Marcus left the office in a daze. He had entered expecting either praise or reprimand for his demonstration. He had not expected to be offered a chance to potentially change humanity's entire status in the coalition. He found Sarah in their quarters and told her everything. She listened with growing excitement, pacing back and forth as he explained Vrel's plan. "This is huge," she said when he finished. "If Vrel succeeds, if humans get reclassified to Class 5, that completely changes everything. Our military contribution would be taken seriously. Our diplomatic position would strengthen. Earth's full membership would be practically guaranteed." "If I succeed in the evaluations," Marcus cautioned. "If I fail, it could make things worse." "You won't fail," Sarah said with absolute certainty. "You just built a working bow from classroom furniture and shot through combat armor. If that's what you can do with 30 minutes and broken chairs, imagine what you can do with proper preparation." Marcus wanted to share her confidence, but he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a trainee trying to complete his military service. He had become a representative of his entire species, tasked with proving that humanity deserved respect and recognition. That evening, Marcus kept his commitment to meet with the interested students in Common Area 7. He had expected a small group, maybe 10 or 15 individuals curious about human weapons technology. Instead, he found over 50 students from at least a dozen different species. They filled the common area, sitting on furniture designed for various body types, all watching him expectantly as he entered. The Corthan student who had invited him approached quickly. "Trainee Chen, thank you for coming. Interest in your presentation exceeded our expectations. I hope this is acceptable." Marcus looked at the assembled crowd. Some faces showed genuine curiosity. Others displayed skepticism. A few looked almost challenging, as if daring him to prove that yesterday's demonstration was not just luck. He thought about his grandfather, teaching a young boy to craft arrows from straight branches and to string a bow with careful precision. He thought about Earth, waiting anxiously for news of how their representatives were performing in coalition training. He thought about Sarah's confidence and Vrel's recommendation. Then he smiled at the assembled students. "It's more than acceptable," he said. "Let's talk about what humans can do." He began to speak, and the students leaned forward to listen.